Thank you for coming out in this very frigid, cold, perfect petitioning weather night. My name is Lauren Vidas. I'm running for City Council in the 2nd District. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the geography of the district, it's gerrymandered in Center City, which I hope to fix, and then it proceeds all the way down Broad Street. It includes the stadiums, it includes the airport, it includes the Navy Yard, and it includes the southwest part of the city. I'm running basically because I think the time has come for us to expect more and demand better from our city leaders. I think that starts with public education in the city. We have to stop thinking of education both as something that happens between the hours of 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. and start taking a more holistic approach to what we consider public education. That means ensuring that our libraries and our recreation centers are open and fully funded. That ensures that on weekends kids have a place to go. That ensures in summertime there's enough programs to keep kids active and not losing all of the knowledge that they gained. It also means in terms of the schools themselves, making sure that we're funding not only the operations of the school, but the physical buildings. I think something like the average school age in the city is 60 years old. So we have schools that have conditions that have mold, that have asbestos, that have lead. And we shouldn't be asking our teachers and our students to put their health at risk just to get an education. I'd like to see the city, when we talk about economic development, think about brains, not just cranes. So being a strong advocate for public education is something that you will have in me on City Council. I volunteer at my local public school. I teach civics there once a month, and it's probably the best thing I do with my limited free time. And I'd like to continue to bring that energy on City Council. We also need to invest in our neighborhoods. The trash situation is absolutely out of control, and it's inexcusable. My past job had me traveling in cities all throughout the country, and nowhere did I encounter the level of trash and litter that we have in Philadelphia. We have neighborhoods that are just seen as convenient places to illegally dump construction debris or trash, and the city has to stop treating it like this is an intractable problem that, oh man, if only we knew how to solve it. We know how to solve it. We are just choosing not to solve it. We're choosing not to put resources into solving this problem. So I think that is something that we need to do as part of investing in our neighborhoods, making sure that no matter what your zip code is, you can walk out of your house and have a clean street for your kids to play on. Trash that would not last 20 minutes in Rittenhouse Square shouldn't last 2 weeks in Grace Ferry. The inequity in our neighborhood services is something that's very troubling. I was just in the Southwest a couple weekends ago, and it is just the illegal dumping that's rampant there is really heartbreaking. And the folks that live there feel like they've been abandoned by the city, and they feel like the city doesn't care and that they're not worth it. And that's the type of attitude that has got to change. So I'm running because I think the inequities in our neighborhoods are just starting to get out of control, and that includes city services. In Southwest Philadelphia, there's one after-school program, I believe, for most of the Southwest District. That was as of this past summer. I'm hoping that it has gotten better, but even if they doubled or tripled that, it's still not nearly enough to serve that community. Campaign finance reform. Oh, corruption, my favorite thing to talk about. So I worked in the Nutter administration as an assistant finance director, and when I worked for Mayor Nutter, one of the things that was really just kind of beaten into you was how important it was for everything that you did as a city employee to be done ethically, openly, and transparently. The back of our business cards had an ethics reminder on them. He created the first chief integrity officer position. He extended the power of the inspector general's office. He really invested in ethics and making sure that corruption was run out of City Hall in a way that I don't think we've seen since he's left. And it's truly troubling. So in terms of corruption, I have a very strong good government platform. It's on the website. I invite you to check it out. But number one, we have to end pay to play. So this means developers who are giving big donations to district council people in order to get land or zoning deals. That's got to stop. Our land use should be for the best and highest use for the community, not the biggest check from a donor. So I have ideas on how we fix that. One of them is to extend our pay-to-play rules that we have for city contracting to developers. If you're a developer, you cannot give to a district council person that you're trying to buy land from, full stop. We have to take money out of that equation. In terms of how the public finance rule or the campaign finance rules work, we have to level the playing field between incumbents and challengers. Because what happens is incumbents, not only do they have 4 years to raise money versus a challenger may have only 1 or 2, but because of councilmatic prerogative, you have folks who would be happy to donate to a challenger, but they are so worried about the repercussions for doing so. So we need to level the playing field in that regard, and I propose to do that by shifting us from a calendar year limitation cycle. So instead of getting 4 years to max out, if you're supporting a candidate, you get to do it once before the primary and once before the general. It would level the playing field for challengers and I think give us a more robust democratic process. Term limits. Councilman Dom introduced a term limit bill. I'm a strong believer in term limits, especially when you have a system that is so weighted towards protecting incumbents. If you can't get your big idea done in 12 or 16 years, maybe you're not the right person to do it. There's no sense of urgency in city council right now. These are people who see once they get elected, it's a seat for life, and how dare anybody run against them. And that attitude is just so messed up. It's only democracy if you have a choice, and I'm so proud of all of the people who are stepping up and challenging incumbents. Janie Blackwell has a challenger, a serious challenger for the first time in years. Jamie, if you guys haven't read up on Jamie, she's amazing. You have Council President Clark has a challenger. Councilman Heenan has a couple of challengers. Councilwoman Bass. I mean, there's so many like this, and this is stuff that's usually unheard of because people are so afraid of what the incumbents are going to do to them. But we can fix that attitude so that we actually really do have elections every 4 years instead of just coronations, which is what it often feels like. Also, in terms of the good government stuff, our inspector general right now only has jurisdiction over the administrative branch. So the inspector general is sort of like the city's version of the cop to kind of like watch out over making sure corruption's not happening internally, making sure fraud's not happening internally. Right now, she only has jurisdiction over the mayoral branch of government, and she is basically only there because the mayor signed an executive order. Her position is not permanent. One of the things I'd like to do is pass a charter change to not only make the inspector general position permanent, but also give her jurisdiction over city council. We shouldn't have to wait for the FBI to tell us something's wrong in City Hall. And I think that could be a very powerful deterrent, knowing that we have someone who's not, all the way down 95 in Washington, D.C. watching us, but across JFK in the Municipal Services Building watching us. I think that can be a very powerful deterrent. The city is starting to backslide. I was actually talking to Mayor Nutter about this last week, and he was, we were talking about how it feels like the bad old days, the days where the FBI was putting bugs in City Hall and, listening into conversations and the guessing game of which city official is going to go to jail next. That's got to stop. It's a disservice to the citizens. It's a disservice to the very people who need government and rely on government the most. And I'm proud to be the one who's going to championship. I don't care if my colleagues hate me because I'm calling for more funding to the ethics board or calling for jurisdiction for the inspector general. It's the right thing to do. It's long overdue, and all the stuff that's happening now shows what happens when we rest on our laurels in terms of ethics and reform.
So with regards to councilmatic prerogative, obviously that's a big hill to climb. You got to get them to do that.
Sisyphus, you're also pushing a boulder at the same time.
At the same time. So what are your thoughts on the strategy of getting on that hill, getting over that hill?
Is there anybody that doesn't know what councilmatic prerogative is? So councilmatic prerogative, I call it's like death by 1,000 cuts. This is the idea that city council, district council people are responsible for decision making when it comes to everything ranging from the transfer of land in the city to things like what are the parking hours on your particular block. So the idea of councilmatic prerogative, people often talk about it as it's like this one thing, and we just need to change the charter and that will get rid of councilmatic prerogative if we just repeal the councilmatic prerogative bill. It's not how it works. It is baked into our charter in 1,000 different ways. And in some cases you can argue like, oh yeah, I understand why the district council person should be responsible for transferring the land. Not so sure why the district council person should decide what time my like permitted parking ends on my like little old block in South Philly. I think what we need is a charter change convention. We have to look at the charter is essentially the city's constitution. It was last rewritten in a big way in 1951. And so it's long overdue for a charter change convention, because what we've seen over the last 10 years is city council, anytime they're told, oh, you can't do that, that's against the charter, they just go, okay, we'll change the charter. Think about how many times you stepped into the voting booth over the last 8 years and it's like, shall the home rule charter be amended? That is city council changing the charter. In some cases it's really great, it's for the good. In other cases, it's taking power away from the administrative branch and giving it to city council. So what we've seen over the last 10 years has been a shift from a strong mayor form of government to a strong council form of government. And I think it's unfortunately thrown the city out of whack. And I think it's time for us to take a look at the charter and decide what form of government we want. We may decide we want co-equal branches of government. That's fine. Well, then maybe we should have term limits so that it's not just council running unchecked. These are very large questions that need to be answered. And I think a charter change convention will help rebalance and help us answer and figure out where does it make sense for council to still be involved. Maybe they shouldn't be setting my parking hours. Maybe that's something better left to the streets department to do by regulation and try to rebalance the duties, so to speak. The other reason I think a charter change convention is important is because the charter basically is the city's, when you play a board game and you like flip over the box and there's the rules, that's our charter. And the rules that we play by are 70 years old. And so that means our budget, the way we do our budget is based on best practices in 1951. The way the budget classes are set out, they didn't have information technology in 1951. So we need a modern budget process, we need a modern governance structure, we need all these things. If we ever want to truly live up to our name as a first-class city, then we have to take a look at the charter and decide where we want the city to go and what we want our future government to look like. And I think a charter change convention is the big, bold, and long overdue way to do that.
My question is, so I live in a very, so I used to live like near a fancy pants Italian market, and you walk 10 minutes where I live now, and it's very poor. And it is very interesting to see the difference on how people are treated. Yeah. So I would like one very specific thing that you would like to do to sort of make it a little more equal, at least in the treatment of the people in my neighborhood now. Because right now there's ice raids, there's that too, but it is striking.
I think it also needs to be, how do we treat the underserved and under-resourced neighborhoods? How do we help lift them up? How do we make sure that the folks that are living in those neighborhoods aren't living in poverty anymore? How do we get them into a path of home ownership where they're actually building wealth? I think those are sort of like the larger, bigger questions. I think, part of the challenge and part of the reason there is this inequity, 311 was supposed to be the great equalizer. That you, I think Joe, everybody shares Joe's sentiments on that. The caption on this is going to be like crowd Snickers. But the problem is the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So I was saying with Rittenhouse Square, nobody would go do a giant tire dump in Rittenhouse Square and expect that to go. So I think it's the district council person really has to lead the charge in that regard and make sure and work closely with the departments to ensure that the allocation of resources isn't necessarily skewed towards the group that is complaining the most, but actually the neighborhoods that need the most. And I think a lot of time it's natural. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. It's the people who are calling your office 50 times a day to complain about the trash guys skipping their block. But I think it really needs to be leadership from the district council person to say the resources need to go here and not necessarily just going to make sure that like people stop calling their office. But again, I think it's got to be part of a larger conversation of not just like making sure basic necessities are met, but building those neighborhoods up and investing resources into those neighborhoods to ensure that the folks there have access to more opportunity than they currently do.
Like, so in my neighborhood, it's Cambodian, it's Vietnamese.
Yeah.
There's definitely like language barrier issues.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I was canvassing one day and I feel like this guy is following me, but he's actually not. He's trying to ask me a question, but he can't figure out the correct English word for it. And so there is a lot of barriers in terms of that.
The second district, 9% of the population is Asian, and obviously within that 9% is a very diverse group of folks. So figuring out how do we canvass and how do we get, you know, how are we able to communicate with the people that we're trying to communicate with? I think the city does in general a very poor job in terms of language barriers. I think it is never more apparent than on election day, where you know, you have folks, particularly in North Philadelphia, particularly in South Philadelphia, you know, you have to wait 45 minutes for someone to come to the poll, and people are gone at that point. So I think the city needs to, if we're truly going to call ourselves a sanctuary city, I think that means more than doing the basic of saying like, oh, you know, we're not going to cooperate with ICE. It's about investing into ensuring that folks are able to access the resources that they need. And again, I think that comes from leadership and persistence by the council person who actually cares about that as an issue and makes it an issue. And I think it's the city investing in the resources to ensure that folks are available to help break down those community barriers. I think a lot of it too is just trust building. You know, South Philly is such an amazingly diverse part of the city, and I was at a FUMO library branch meeting, and there was a woman from the Donatucci branch, and she was telling the FUMO library branch librarian how they should do this Easter event like they do at Donatucci, and they'll get Easter money and they'll do Easter eggs. And the woman at the FUMO branch said, none of my kids like are Christian. They're from all over, you know, nobody like that doesn't make sense here. Yeah. And I think having that sort of understanding that, you know, we're talking maybe a 12-block difference is a whole world culturally. You know, I think just even being sensitive to that and being aware of that and working to build that trust and build that communication is step one. And I think there's a lot of distrust, and I think it's probably a very scary time to be a non-native language speaker. I think it's probably a very scary time to be someone that is here from another country, and the only way we improve that situation is by building the trust where we can.
Thank you, Ms. Vidas.
You're welcome. Excellent question.
Pedestrian traffic deaths are at an all-time high. When I walked my dog, would almost get hit by a car like every time, at least once a day. I walk them like 3 times a day. I'm also a cyclist, and I feel like I've had cops, like you're supposed to pass with like 5 or 4 feet. I've had cops like whiz right by me, not any space. Like, what can council do to make the streets safer for everyone?
I was on Mayor Kenny's campaign, and I was one of the people pushing him to adopt the Vision Zero platform. And I was very excited to see him adopt it and very disappointed to see how little the city has invested in it. I think at some point when we're talking about like the charter change and where it makes sense for city council to be involved versus the departments to do things, I think at some point we have to recognize that even though we are the birthplace of democracy, not everything is a democratic process. In some cases, it is about best practices. It is about, you know, obviously we should be having community input into all these things, but when it comes to public safety and making sure people's lives aren't being put at risk needlessly, we need to enforce the laws that are on the books. Especially walking around down here, crosswalk blocking seems to be like a hobby of folks. It is a very South Philly thing, and you know that's something that impacts everyone. That impacts you know, just regular people walking with their dogs. It impacts people who have disabilities, who are maybe not mobile on their own, who rely on walkers or wheelchairs, families with strollers. This is something that we have to recognize impacts a whole group of people and puts their lives needlessly at risk. So we need to enforce the laws is step one. Number two, I think we have to invest in the infrastructure. I think that includes the signage for bikes may use full lane. There's somebody who actually has a big one on the back of their bike, and it's probably, it's amazing. I think we also need to recognize that, it's not Joe. Joe has the passing one on his bike, right?
I've got the 4 foot.
Oh, you have the 4 foot one. It's like, who is it, Lee, that has the bikes may use full lane?
She has the same one, and actually we were at the bingo thing. I took a picture of our bikes side
together.
by side,
That was
and I wrote,
good.
"We will win."
Yeah.
And we were right. We had the same, like, hers is just a tad different. Yeah.
Yeah, Joe and I were actually at a vigil. Was it last week? All the weeks blend together.
Thursday morning. The human protected bike lane.
So we were at the human protected bike lane, and that, I don't know if you guys remember Emily Fredrickson, who was in a bike lane when she was hit by a trash truck making a turn. 24 years old, on her way to work, doing everything right. Had a helmet on, was riding in a bike lane. Pain is an infrastructure. I think we have to recognize that, and I think we need to ramp up our investment into protected bike lanes. So Emily's family spoke, and it was just like absolutely gutting. And then another family spoke. They had lost their husband, who was a public transportation advocate. He made the mistake of just standing on a street corner waiting to cross the street at 16th and JFK, and was mowed over. So I think we as a city have to decide what our priorities are. And if our priorities are high speeds and getting to point A to point B as quickly and aggressively as possible, then those numbers are going to continue to rise. I think we also have to recognize, a lot of times you hear people who are advocating for bicycle lanes, oh, it's the war on cars. It's not about a war on cars. Almost 45% of the city has to commute outside of Philadelphia every day for work. Cars are necessary until we attract more jobs and people can just hop on public transit. Vision Zero is about making sure that when you leave your house in the morning, you get home safely, whether you're in a car, whether you're in a bike, whether you're using public transportation, whether you're walking. And so I think City Council can really lead on that. Hey guys. Well, hello. I think City Council can really lead on that. I'm frustrated with the bike lane situation on South Street and Lombard. The South Street neighbors supported the bike lane. The Lombard Street neighbors were opposed. So now you're safe riding eastbound, but good luck riding westbound. Like that type of attitude, again, I think input from neighbors is absolutely critical, but at some point we have to recognize that bicycle infrastructure isn't a matter of convenience, it's a matter of safety. And I think, frankly, it's better for both the cars and the driver and the bicyclists. People are more comfortable knowing the bikes are over there, they're not going to weave in and out. So I think I hope to be a leader on that, to show the sky isn't falling, because Philadelphians love change as long as everything remains exactly the same. So I think a lot of times you need somebody to just kind of, and I hope to be that way with councilmatic prerogative, to say, hey, look, you can see this power, or you can do these things, and the sky isn't going to fall. It's better for everybody, and I think we can get there. I think it's education, it's conversations. You're never going to be able to build consensus on a lot of issues, and at some point I think you do need to try to do what's best, and you have a moral obligation to make sure that you're protecting the health, safety, and welfare of everybody who uses the roads. So
I'm not exactly sure if everybody has this question, but I'm just wondering, I'm not familiar with how the council people are able to affect where the money gets allocated to. So in what way, shape, or form does that process happen, and like how? So
they have a smoke-filled back room. No. So the budget process, the formal budget process usually starts in February or March, when what happens is the mayor's office is charged with putting together a budget. And they send that proposed budget over to City Council, and it's made up of a bunch of moving pieces. You have the operating budget, which is essentially like personnel cost and things like that. And then you have the capital budget, which is physical improvements to city infrastructure, to buildings, things like that. Then you also have what's called the 5-year plan, which is the city is required to do. And this sets out, the city's forced to pass a balanced budget, and it can't just be balanced for this year. They have to show that their 5-year plan is reasonable and balanced throughout the 5-year plan. And it predicts revenue, and it's supposed to help them just be better at managing money. So once that all gets introduced, you begin the series of budget hearings. And this is where each department comes in and they present testimony on their budget. So you'll have the streets department and they'll say, well, $100 million budget this year, it was up 5% from last year. This is how we're going to spend this money differently. This is what we did with the money last year. And City Council is able to ask questions to each individual department. And so that process goes on for 3 months. And what happens is during that, you'll see some back and forth between the administration. Some council people will have pet projects that they want to see funded, and I don't mean that in a derogatory term. It might be just like an issue that they really care about, that they think, Councilwoman Sanchez, she's in the 7th district, and the opioid crisis is really in the heart of her district. So she's always advocating for more funding and more resources to address that issue. And every council person kind of has their passion area, and so part of it is conversations with the administration around that. And then a lot of times what happens if the mayor is looking for a tax raise, that's when like the real horse trading begins, where somebody will say, I'll give you a yes vote on this issue, but that means I need funding on this issue. So it really is, I was kind of joking about the smoke-filled back room. It really just does happen over text message usually. But they negotiate that way. And then what ends up happening is they'll introduce amendments to the budget and the budget will get passed. Throughout the year, they can shift things around where needed. And so City Council, the Appropriations Committee, has a lot of power over where money gets moved. So if we gave the Streets Department $100 million and they're just being really efficient this year, and they have $10 million, Joe's like, that would never happen. I didn't say these examples were realistic. So they can move money around in the middle of the year. So City Council really does have a lot of authority over how money is allocated, and they are able to hold the administration accountable for where that money goes, because ultimately the mayor can propose a budget, but he can only spend it as council sees fit.
So I went to a campaign event, so I will not name. And essentially at the event, what I heard was that they're happy to have one of their own at council. You've been snickering all day. And so when we say earlier that we're all the same city, that's to your credit. I agree, but that's not necessarily the opinion of a lot of people in the city, because for a city that's majority minority and has significantly high poverty rate compared to the national average, that would just mean, just by proxy, that it's a city that's dealt with being on the front lines of racial and economic discrimination. And so a lot of neighborhoods, I imagine, that are majority minority have been largely neglected for decades, probably longer. And so a lot of the people in these neighborhoods, I assume, want people in council that they know personally, they feel like is one of their own that they can trust. And even if things are slower paced than they would like in terms of development, it's still someone they feel like is on their side. So I guess for you, how would you address the distrust in the 2nd district around development in their district versus the rest of the city?
So I do think we have to get out of this us versus them mentality, because I think I see it on the national level, and I see it trickling down to the local level, and I think it's really destructive in the end goal of trying to accomplish things. But I appreciate and I understand it exists, and I understand why it exists. And what I would say to people is I would ask them to not necessarily to kind of take a deeper look and ask themselves what is the councilman doing on this issue? What is his track record on this? So if you think he is doing a great job, then I respectfully disagree, but I understand why I don't have your vote. I think what we've seen with the incumbent is a lot of missed opportunities. You've had an incumbent in office for 8 years now, and this is when the first wave of development was jumping Washington Ave and really pushing into Point Breeze. And I think you've missed a lot of opportunities there to do meaningful, affordable housing development, to do community-based development. I think when you look at some of the work that the Women's Revitalization Project is doing, they're doing community land trust, which is awesome. I love community land trusts. They're doing 5 units of housing. We have 100,000 people on our affordable housing wait list. 5 units is just not nearly enough. So what I would say is look at the councilman's track record and look at me. what I want to do is I want to be aggressive. I'm not worried about. Again, it's this idea that people think they're going to be in office for the rest of their lives. I'm not worried about that. I want to get in and I want to do as much good as humanly possible. I think we have to be aggressive when it comes to affordable housing because the city is getting very unaffordable very quickly. And I don't think the leadership that's in City Hall now is doing anything nearly, I should say, they're doing stuff, but it's not nearly at the rate that they need to be doing it. I think when you look at just how the second district is shifting, I don't necessarily agree it's slower than it would have been. I think, in fact, that there have been missed opportunities to do meaningful things using the land bank, using all of the vacant land that existed in Point Breeze 10 years ago versus now. So yeah, I mean, the only thing I can tell them is like, here's my plan, here's what I would do, here's how I expect to be held accountable, here are the goals I'm setting for myself as your council person. And if I don't accomplish this stuff and you're disappointed with me in 4 years, you have every right to move on. But I think we have to give new folks a chance because I don't think the status quo is cutting it. I think it's paying a lot of lip service to these issues, but not actually doing a lot of action. And it's unfortunate because the folks that need the action the most are being hurt the most by the inaction. So.
Can you talk a little bit about Point Breeze Ave?
Yes. Oh my God.
And your vision for that?
So Point Breeze Ave, I think, has some of the best commercial corridor bones of any commercial corridor in the city. I think the challenges of Point Breeze Avenue right now are, number one, it's base zoning, and number two, the lack of a plan, a cohesive plan to attract a diverse mix of commercial tenants to the corridor. And I mean that both in terms of making sure that we're not forcing longtime business owners out, but also making sure that we don't have $7 stores going down Point Breeze Avenue, or CVS, Rite Aid, Walgreens, the trifecta that I think we see on so many other corridors. So I think Point Breeze Ave, we need to upzone it. I think East Passyunk provides a really interesting model that we can copy for Point Breeze Avenue, which is you have residential above. And the residential above can subsidize a very diverse group of commercial tenants below. By upzoning it, it also allows you to do an affordability component in the residential above, which I think is really important. And I think then we have to have an aggressive strategy of attracting businesses to the avenue. One of the things I think we really need to focus on is you have so many small business owners in Point Breeze that don't have a brick and mortar. How do we get the woman who does hair in her living room into her own salon? How do we get the person who sells plates out of their kitchen? How do we get them like a catering license and get them where they're employing 3 or 4 other people and actually building a small business and creating wealth? Those are conversations that it's not an easy answer. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of coordination. But I think what we need to do is come together as a community and decide what should Point Breeze Avenue look like? What's our end goal with Point Breeze Avenue? What are the businesses that we want to see? What do we want the feel to be as we walk down the commercial corridor and work backwards from there? I don't think simply saying, oh, we're going to change the zoning and walk away and the market's going to take over. It's not going to build us the type of commercial corridor I think anybody wants. So yeah, no, I think I actually talked to a commercial leasing agent about Point Breeze Ave to be like, what is holding this avenue back? And it's a confluence of issues. And one of the biggest issues is that our Commerce Department has a commercial corridor project, but they're not fighting for Point Breeze Ave. They just want a business to locate on any commercial corridor in the city. They claim it as a victory. Point Breeze Avenue needs an advocate. Point Breeze Avenue needs someone organizing the current existing businesses, the potential future businesses, the nearby neighbors. It's going to take a village to get Point Breeze Avenue to live up to its full potential. But I think that's something that we can do. My biggest concern again is just saying, oh, we're just going to rezone it and let the market do what it wants. Then we're never going to unlock its full potential because it'll just be whoever can pay the rent, and that's not going to be the type of vibrant neighborhood commercial corridor that we could otherwise have.
As I was talking to people this weekend, 3 main concerns kept coming up. Parking, trash, which your plan for combating that was very well put, and gun violence. These are the 3 major concerns that I heard from people, and they're like, what is Lauren's plan?
Number one, we have a parking authority that is a total and utter disaster. It's a $250 million a year entity that all the stuff that came out in the indictment, we took back the SRC. It's time to take back the PPA from the state. I think we need a cohesive parking plan for South Philadelphia. That means doing a deep dive to figuring out what cars are on our street, who owns them, and where they're living. The number of out-of-state plates I count on a given day from people who just like find a non-permitted block and they just dump their cars. And you see it after it snows. There's like this neck down where you can see where cars drive. And then there's like the ice that just stays on the car for 3 weeks from the cars that don't drive. So I'd like to see the PPA. It's, to a certain extent, we need to empower the PPA to actually come up with a parking plan for South Philadelphia and enforce getting a lot of these cars that aren't owned by residents off the block, and that will help with clearing intersections and reducing the overall parking crunch. Litter I talked about already. What was the third? Gun violence. I think we were at the vigil a couple months ago, and I'm not sure if it was that event or another event where somebody said the opposite of opportunity is violence. And that really struck me because I think we can't look at gun violence as like, oh, we just need to put more cameras up and put more cops, patrolling with their lights on. I think we have to take a broader look and ask, like, why is this happening? And I think to a large extent it's happening because the lack of opportunity for so many kids just makes this seem inevitable. When you think that you're not going to live past 22 or 23, like why, like college, like why, but why would you think about? So I think it's a lack of opportunity for young people is a huge thing. I think it's lack of jobs. I think it's a lack of educational opportunity once they move on from high school. So I think we really have to, again, take a step back. We need to do this sort of day-to-day stuff. Public spaces are one of the few things that we can actually physically control. We do a lot of people-based intervention around gun violence, which is like we're going to come together as a group and talk about how we're like not going to shoot each other. And what studies have shown is that that doesn't really work. It costs a lot of money and the results are pretty negligible. What does work is making sure that we're investing in place-based interventions, and that means making sure that our streets are well lit, making sure empty lots are cleaned and fenced, making sure our libraries are open, making sure our recreation centers are open, making sure there's eyes on the street and economic activity so that you take away the place to do the violence and the violence drops considerably. So I think it needs to be a combination of all of those things, but I think it's an indictment on the city as a whole for the lack of opportunity for folks. I think that's why we're seeing this. Well, thank you guys so much for coming out tonight. If you live in the 2nd District, please sign my petition. Thank you, John. This was really awesome. I really appreciate the opportunity.